Welcome everyone today. My name is Varun Nakor, and I'm Executive Director of the API Victory Alliance. I wanted to welcome you all today to our ongoing series of gun violence programming here at the API Victory Alliance. This, of course, comes on the heels of a national convening that we held in Washington, D.C. last month with our partners at the API Against Gun Violence Coalition, Chinese for Affirmative Action, Newtown Action Alliance, Hope and Heal Fund, and Moms Rising. Since the Atlanta spa shootings more than 2 years ago, and even earlier, we've begun to see a rising level of violence in and by the API community with respect to guns. The dynamics around guns in the API community, one of which has not traditionally seen levels of violence nor high number of purchases traditionally, is now growing at an alarming rate, and we're experiencing the early days of an epidemic. Gun violence is now the #1 non-economic issue amongst APIs, according to polling we participated in last year. And compared to all other groups, APIs are the most fearful of being involved in gun violence. There's a lot of work to be done, and we can't do it alone. And that's why we put this webinar together today, so that we can lift up our API stories that reflect this rising gun violence in our community, so we can start coming up with solutions. And so in this first portion of the program, we're going to give space to some of our community members to share their survivor stories. And before I get into introducing our bios, just some quick housekeeping notes. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and also there may be press on the call as well. Just wanted to let everybody know that everything on this call is going to be attributional. So if you have any questions and didn't want your name to be said in any kind of public way, just let us know in the chat. But we will have time for questions after this first section with survivors. So it's my pleasure to introduce our first panel, Mia Levias-Porter, Henry Lowe, and Carlo Irving. First, Mia is going to moderate, and her bio, I just wanted to read quickly, is Mia is a mother of 2 boys and lives in Los Angeles. She first became a gun violence prevention advocate after Parkland, where she began volunteering with Moms Demand Action. And she realized that she actually was a survivor of gun violence. Her brother Junior died by gun suicide over 30 years ago after a 5-year struggle with schizophrenia. And then we also have on the survivors panel, Kalor Vang. Kalor is a nursing student and a mother of 2 boys who is married to her high school sweetheart. She and her family survived the Vietnam War and years in a Thai refugee camp before coming to the United States. And in 2018, she became a gun violence survivor and has been active ever since to stop gun violence. And last but not least, we have Councilman Henry Lowe. Henry's history of public service spans over 20 years. In March of 2020, he was elected to the Monterey Park City Council, District 4, and made history as the City of Monterey Park's first openly gay council member. Of course, he served as mayor during the Monterey Park shooting earlier this year. So with that, let me hand it back to Mia to moderate this first panel. Thank you, Mia.
Hi, Varun. Thank you so much for having us. Thank you everyone who is here attending this important conversation. As Varun said, my name is Mia Levias-Porter. I'm from Los Angeles, mom of 2, survivor, and I've been an activist in this movement for 5 years. It is my privilege to introduce to all of you 2 fellow survivors from California, Tyler Vang and Council Member Henry Lowe. As Varun said, the 3 of us participated in the second AAPI Against Gun Violence Conference in DC last month. And we're here to share our stories with all of you in the hopes that you can understand the different ways in which gun violence has impacted us within the AAPI community and hopefully inspire all of you to action. In my case, it took me 25 years to even realize that I was a survivor. I first got involved in this movement because of the Parkland shooting. It made me want to do something to keep my baby safe. But it was almost immediately after volunteering, hearing a story similar to mine, that it forever shifted my world and deepened my commitment to this cause. My brother Junior died by gun suicide over 30 years ago after a 5-year battle with schizophrenia. But coming from a strict Catholic Filipino immigrant family, we were raised with what happens in the family stays in the family. So the message was clear that my brother's mental illness and his suicide were shameful. So we all buried our pain and our loss, but it manifested in different ways for each of us. We didn't lose just Junior that day. His death fractured our family. It shut down my brother Danny, who was the one who had found Junior's body. Up to now, he can't get married. He's antisocial, can't have friends, afraid to get a job. And my dad's health deteriorated. He died within 3 years after, and I tell people that he died of a broken heart. It wasn't until I became involved with Moms Demand Action that I realized I wasn't alone, and that I could turn the pain of what happened to our family into purpose, that there were proven solutions that could have prevented his death. And sharing Junior's story helped me heal and make peace with the shame that I lived with for decades. And knowing that our family story could inspire others to step forward and share their experiences, or perhaps inspire electeds to write life-saving gun safety legislation. That's what kept me going. And I know that my fellow survivor friends feel similar. We're sharing our stories because we don't want anyone to feel our pain, the fear, the PTSD that we all know too well. And we share in hopes that it will force change and inspire others to action. Kalor and Councilmember Lowe, thank you both for your courage to share your survivor stories with us. Could you each tell us how gun violence has impacted your life? Let's start with the council member.
Yes, thank you, Mia, and good to see you and Kavang and everyone whom we were able to come together a few weeks ago in Washington, D.C. for the second annual Gun Violence Conference. And it was important for me to be there to share an update on how our community of Monterey Park is still in its journey of recovery from what is now considered the worst mass shooting incident in Los Angeles County. It's only been 5 months, but it has been, it's actually probably longer than 5 months. But I think what this tragedy that took the lives of 11 people and traumatized people who were at the dance hall, as well as the entire community, is that as Asian Americans, we are not immune to the issue of gun violence, as we've all heard from Mia's own account of her own family history, as we'll hear today in this panel, and that the tragedy of January 21st also, I think, exposed the fragility of our community, because if you think about the issues behind the gunman, and unfortunately we'll never know his motives, but what we know so far, we can probably raise issues of domestic violence, mental health access, economic inequities, and all of that amplified by gun violence, which is really, in my opinion, a wake-up call for us to be part of this conversation. Our community, since that time, we have made a lot of effort as a city, as a community, to help those collectively recover, to cope, to heal. Among some of the things that we've done is we've, as a city, we've created a community healing fund to help our community in coping and healing and dealing with the trauma of the shooting. We have been forging partnerships with community-based organizations like Los Angeles Chinatown Service Center to provide mental health services to the community. In fact, just a few weeks ago, in partnership with the Chinatown Service Center, we are creating a resiliency center. And that resiliency center is thanks to a grant from the federal government, and is modeled on resiliency centers that were created in neighboring Las Vegas, to create a space to help with people who are in need of continued support and counseling. We've also been very fortunate to have had the strong support from our partners in federal government. Congressman G. Chu has been so vital in bringing together resources and leaders from the Biden administration. Of course, the president himself came to Monterey Park to announce his executive order on gun violence prevention. And as we reflect on this the 6 month going on to what will soon be probably the 1 year anniversary, we are continuing to assess where is the need, the businesses that are impacted. What was important for me to remember is that this shooting tragedy occurred during Lunar New Year, which for many of our businesses, it's one of the most important periods for business. And so just a few weeks ago, last week, me and my colleagues, our Mayor Pro Tem Thomas Wong, our other Councilmember Yvonne Yu, were able to join a local business right next to the site of the dance hall shooting. It's called Traditional Guilin Noodles, and I mentioned name. If you're ever in Monterey Park, great restaurant. Although we have many good restaurants, but one of our utilities, Southern California Gas Company, presented a check of $5,000 to this business to support it, because I understand that since the shooting, this business has lost 40% of its customers. And a lot of our businesses have been struggling to continue to survive, to thrive. And we've been fortunate, again, working with our federal representative. We've had the Small Business Administration provide low cost loans to help them continue to be able to function and continue for the business to continue to stay open. And as a city council, we also continue to act on how we as a municipal government can adopt sensible ordinances to protect our communities to the extent that it's constitutionally possible. For example, last night at our council meeting, we had a hearing on creating a firearm health protection zone, and we are also continuing to monitor legislation at the state and federal level, as well as county efforts in which we can be part of that conversation in supporting sensible gun violence prevention legislation. But I think it's important that for me, the reason why I always participate in panels like today's is that I don't want people to forget Monterey Park. I don't want people to forget the 11 victims or the 50 plus people who have been traumatized because they're there at that dance hall. And as I said in the beginning, gun violence touches every community. And as Asian Americans, we need to be part of that conversation. We need to be united in advocating for, at the federal level, a ban on assault weapons, ammunitions. One statistic that was said to me was that although nationally Asian Americans have the lowest rate of gun ownership, but because of the rise of anti-Asian hate crimes in the past few years, gun manufacturers have used this opportunity to sell and market firearms to our community. And I say that's unacceptable. And we will not let our community become a new ground to promote more gun violence. And so that's at least my report on how we as a community continues to plot its path forward from the tragedy of January 21st. But as I tell people, we are a resilient community. We are a strong community. Our city motto is pride in the past, faith in the future. And although we've experienced a very traumatic event, I have a lot of faith that as a community, we will recover and continue to show America what Monterey Park is all about.
Thank you so much, Henry. I really want to commend you. I know that there was something I had heard about Monterey Park being one of the, prior to the shooting, the safest community, one of the 3 safest communities in America. And so this kind of shooting was so unexpected, and how you said that it does impact every community. And I think that Monterey Park was the jolt that the AAPI community really needed to see that this can happen anywhere. And I commend you for your leadership stepping up to the moment. And I'm grateful for your partnership in this movement. Thank you so
Yes.
much, Henry.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you.
I'm so sorry, I muted myself. Mass shootings, although they get the notoriety, actually only make up 4% of gun deaths in America. But there are thousands of stories that have impacted so many lives, communities that don't get the national or even local attention. Kalor Vang, Kalor, could you share your story, please? Thank you for being here. Can you share your story?
Yes, I would love to share my story. Thanks, Mia. Thanks, Henry, for that. And thank you, everyone, for showing up today. This is a near and dear purpose to me and my family. So as I was introduced earlier by Varun, I am a nursing student and a mother of two, and I'm also married. My ethnic background is Hmong American. My family did survive the Vietnam War. I was actually born in the Thailand refugee camps as we made our way to the United States. I grew up in Stockton, California. As some of you don't know, Stockton, California, unfortunately, is a really high crime-driven city. And never did I think that I would be a part of this community, but this is one of the communities that we don't get to choose if we are a part of. And unfortunately, we are now gun violence survivors. In 2018, on the night of Mother's Day, my little brother, who was only 22 at the time, with his wife, who was also 22, and their 5-year-old daughter, were killed. And it remains unsolved to this day. We don't know what the motive is, why it happened, but we know that it started because of guns. Since 2018, I've been trying to put back the pieces for myself and for my family to figure out why we live in this world that has this issue as a first world country. And I have put myself in this movement because just for my own healing, I need to make sense of why this issue exists and what's the root of this issue and how we can stop and prevent this from happening to other families in the United States. And not just, of course, the AAPI community, but every citizen of the United States. As I said, this is not a community that we choose to be a part of. And unfortunately, every day this community keeps growing. And I really feel passionately about stopping this from happening. There are very logical ways and logical steps that we as a country and our government can take to stop this from happening, but yet there's many times that it's failed to happen. On a personal level, I have went back to school to become a nurse because I feel that is where I can also be in the front lines. I've done my own healing to get to this point, to be able to speak about what has happened to my family, how gun violence has impacted us. But I feel I know personally and firsthand that it's really difficult to even start healing and to get to the point of where you can really comprehend why this issue exists. And so I want to be at the bedside. I want to be there when it first happened to families who are rushed to hospitals, because that's where I was when I first heard that my brother and his little family has been gunned down. I went to the emergency room hoping to find some answers, to see them. And in the chaos of the event, I realized not a lot of people knew how to talk to us immediately as victims of gun violence survivor. And I want to be there when it happens for other families, because unfortunately it's happening too much. But that's how gun violence has impacted me. And that is the movement that I have taken upon myself to be a part of.
Thank you so much, Kalora. And I can only imagine what an incredible nurse compassionate nurse that you'll be. And again, to have you in this movement, thank you for sharing your story. Excuse me. I want to give both Henry and Kalor, do you have any final last message, especially regarding gun violence within the AAPI community that you want to share with attendees today? Kalor, do you want to go ahead and start? Or Henry? Henry's.
No, Kalor, please, by all means, please.
Well, I do just want to say, I think with all the recent hate crimes against the AAPI community, knowing that it's really hitting home with a lot of our Asian communities with gun violence, many of us are buying into that fear mongering of you need to protect yourself. And I want to share the statistics that I had learned when we were in DC last month, how having more access to guns actually increases the chance of violence to happen. So it's not true that you are protecting yourself. It's more likely that it will fire randomly, and it's more likely that you may kill a loved one in your home than the chances of protecting yourself in a home invasion or random shooting. So I definitely want to emphasize that guns do not equal safety.
Agree. Thank you. Henry?
Thank you. And well said, Kalor. As I also said earlier, that gun manufacturers are targeting our community, and we cannot let that happen. It will just amplify a lot of other important social issues in our community. And I think as APIs, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Native Hawaiians, we need to first and foremost share our stories, talk about our communities, how we have experienced and have been touched by gun violence, and also make sure that the gun violence prevention movement nationally in our communities, do not forget about our AAPI communities. Again, oftentimes we talk about how we have the stereotype of the model minority, and that somehow issues that affect other communities don't apply to us. And in this case, as my community's experience, gun violence happens everywhere in every community. And it's important that our policymakers, our elected leaders, those within the gun violence prevention community, they see us, they see our issues, and that we remain vocal, and our voices and stories are not heard, are not forgotten, and are heard resoundingly loud and clear.
Perfectly said. Thank you, Kalor. Thank you, Henry. To wrap up, I just want to share that, we have become a nation of survivors. 58% of Americans say that they or someone they know has been impacted by gun violence. In doing this gun violence prevention work, it's critical that we do center the voices of survivors, because it's easy to hear the statistics that 110 Americans are dying daily by gun violence, that 2/3 are suicides, that there have been 392 mass shootings to date in 2023. These figures are shocking, but it's our stories that move people to action. And we hope that by hearing our stories today, it will compel all of you to speak out and take action to keep our API and all of our communities safe. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Mia, Kalor, Henry. We're going to just pause for a second and see if there's any questions in the chat. And if you haven't put one in, please do so now. And if you wanted to remain anonymous, you can just send a direct message to Liz Lee in the chat. So we'll just give it a quick second and see if there's any questions. Otherwise, we can let our survivor panels depart. Okay, I don't think we have any questions. So with that, I wanted to thank our panelists again. I know this is, oh, sorry, we do have one question. Let me see if I can retrieve it. Liz, I'm not seeing the question directly. Do you want to read it? Oh, okay, here we go. So, and any one of our survivors or all three could certainly feel free to respond. So, Kalor, you had mentioned the statistics about guns not keeping us safe. And once again, anybody feel free to respond. But the question in the chat is, if not guns, what can we do to feel safe as a community?
That's a great question. I also have been, the ways that I've been trying to keep my family safe and how we've been able to avoid purchasing guns as a resort to make us feel safer is, I think, truly healing from the inside out has really helped me to make peace with this, our reality that we had. Not that we have had peace with it, because this issue still haunts us every day, but by me advocating and trying to make changes slowly in the government and in our local government, that has, and seeing that there has been some change with the safety gun storage laws and also local gun restriction laws and background check laws, those small movements, yes, very small, have been reassuring to me that we as a society is getting there to where we don't need weapons to keep us safe in the home. And it's going to be a whole community that is coming together to keep each other safe. And there are good people out there. For example, the Monterey shooting, the hero that stopped the gunman didn't have a gun. He didn't need a gun to stop another gunman. So we don't need guns to prevent, we don't need guns to fight guns, essentially.
I agree completely with what Kalor said. In addition, there is at every single level of elections, vote for candidates who are gun safety activists or aware of this, of their voices, whether it's school board to the White House, because there are proven legislation, awareness campaigns that can mitigate gun violence, whether it's tools like extreme risk protection orders, which temporarily takes away a gun from somebody who's a risk to themselves or others. It's awareness like 988 campaign as a suicide prevention tool. And then it's even being aware of the laws regarding safe storage. LAUSD here 2 or 3 years ago sent a letter out to every single parent in the school district informing them that guns need to be the law, that guns need to be safely stored. And just that kind of awareness and making people realize this is the epidemic of gun violence and that we all have to do our part. You know, it's a good start to keep our community safe. Henry, anything to add?
Sure. Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. Again, you were just talking about LA Unified and again, you know, efforts to educate, encourage, you know, gun storage, because that's something that we as a city are actually looking at as well. As you know, how can we have our own ordinances, for example, to have residents safely lock and store their firearms. You know, what's interesting too is that in the course of our deliberations yesterday, it was pointed out that and then actually here in California, we have many cities like San Jose, I think Davis, who have enacted gun storage legislation. But unfortunately, a lot of those ordinances might be in jeopardy because of recent Supreme Court decisions that call into question if such ordinances are even defensible. And I think that all of us have seen probably with concern about recent rulings by the Supreme Court, and that really then calls into the urgency to keep our federal representatives accountable, because if the Supreme Court continues to strike down you know, local ordinances or state laws, then that means it behooves us to then lobby and call out our federal representatives to then enact national legislation.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. Yeah, go ahead, Mia.
Oh, I had forgotten to mention that there are also, as Calord said, trying to end the cycle of people hurting people. Programs like violence interrupter programs, make sure they get funded. Even by investing in creating parks within lower income communities where there's a higher risk of street shootings or what have you, by planting trees in low income communities, that curbs gun violence in the communities because they feel invested in, seen, and the actual visceral feeling of that you feel like connecting with nature. So there are ways that even just by investing in your communities, we can curb gun violence.
Great. Thank you again, Mia, Kalor, Councilman Lowe, for joining us today. Feel free to stay on if you care to. And we're now going to transition over to the next section of our program today, which is narrative change. And we might be asking ourselves, why are we discussing narrative change? And I think it's important that we look at what we currently believe in this country about guns, our gun culture, and frankly, who's pushing those narratives, and why in this country, for example, does the Second Amendment seems to trump all other aspects of our country's founding documents, for example. And it's important to start breaking down what we've come to accept as a given with respect to guns, so that we can start building on those accepted thoughts and deconstructing them, but now reconstruct them on something based upon truth and our current values, not the values of 1776, but our values today as all Americans, so that we can really start building a society free from fear, violence, and hate. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to someone who knows a lot more about this than me. And it's my pleasure and privilege to introduce Kana Hammond. And I'd like to read her bio. So Kana is a narrative strategist and a nonprofit leader with over a decade of experience in launching programs and organizations, mobile apps, and digital campaigns. And in addition to where she works today at the Asian American Futures organization, Kana has worked on the May 19th project, the Butterfly Lab for Immigrant Narrative Strategy at Race Forward, Emerging Radiance, Midiar Network, and Y-Core. If everyone can please help me welcome Kana Hammond. Thank you so much.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kana Hammond. As Varun mentioned, I'm the narrative strategist at Asian American Futures. Thank you so much for the warm welcome and inviting me to be here today. I'm really, really excited. So a little bit about Asian American Futures. We were founded in 2020 to ensure that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are an essential part of the American narrative. You might know us from the Gold Futures Challenge, which is a grant competition that we run in partnership with Gold House to invest in grassroots AAPI orgs. But we also build narrative power and we activate new voices who will shape a powerful majority, starting with Gen Zers and millennials. But we're not here to talk just about the AAPI community. We're here to talk about narrative power and gun violence. And I really feel grateful to the survivors for sharing their stories, and hope we can build off of that and offer a framework for how to move forward and ensure that those stories have the reach and power that I know that they can have. So where are we starting? We all know that there's confusing and kind of competing data about AAPIs and guns. So on one hand, our community supports stronger gun laws, like much of America. At the same time, data is showing that there's been an increase in gun ownership amongst Asian Americans. How do we have a situation where support for gun laws means that we have more gun purchases? And it's really confusing until you look more closely at the narratives at play. And there's so many competing narratives. On one hand, As the survivors talked about, guns lead to death on both a really personal and a mass scale. Others might say that guns are the things that are keeping us safe. Even if people support gun legislation, there's a perception that it's unpopular, or that when you look at the headlines with APIs and guns, it sounds as if it's an issue that's isolated to our community, that's not connected to this larger conversation about gun violence. So where do we go from here? How might we strengthen our narrative power around this issue? And how do we build a majority that both supports gun control and reduce gun ownership? Now, I haven't done enough testing or narrative analysis to tell you exactly what to say. I know there's been people working on this issue for a lot longer than me. And so instead, I'd like to offer a framework to help us all think about how we might leverage the energy, the emotion that's already out there to build narrative power for this issue. And when I talk about narrative power, what does that actually mean? So we know from so many examples from recent and more past history about how transformative narrative power can be for social movements. So we saw it in action in the way that Love is Love propelled the marriage equality movement to victory, how Black Lives Matter changed our perceptions of racial justice and brought out so many ordinary people to the streets. Even Asian American was a narrative invention. It started in the 60s and 70s as an alternative to the term Oriental. And it initially spoke to a set of ideas and values rooted in justice and in cross-racial solidarity. And there are a number of AAPI groups beginning to use narrative strategy to advocate for ideas like solidarity, to combat disinformation, to increase AAPI belonging, and now to prevent gun violence. I want to say too that narrative work is really long-term. Passing legislation in the next cycle or getting that ballot measure on the ballot, those can all be part of it. But the goal or the job of effective narrative work is to help these policy wins to victory, because we need people to believe that those policies or that change is necessary in the first place. So when we're building narrative power, we create conditions for change to happen, both political, cultural, and social. And more importantly, we create the conditions for ordinary people to be contributing their own stories and experiences to the conversation, just like the panelists we heard from today. And we create the conditions to mobilize a majority of the public that includes both longtime activists and newcomers alike. So how do we actually do this? I know at the convening in DC, Rinku already did a narrative power workshop, and she talked about things like the difference between strategic communications and cultural strategy work, and about harmful and helpful narratives. So I don't want to repeat the meat of that, but did want to build on that session with 4 key questions that I like to ask myself as I'm starting to work on narrative for a new issue. And those 4 questions are about identifying the future that we want to see, identifying those values that future is rooted in, getting in the minds and heads of our audience, and thinking about how we might reach them more effectively. So first, what is the future that we want to see? I cannot stress that enough. Those who are like myself, we nerd out on data, we like to talk about the problem, we argue about which problem is more important, and we miss the opportunity to help people understand what's the future we're going towards. We all know that guns can kill people. That isn't something that we need to debate. Instead, let's talk about some of our short and long-term goals. So short-term, for example, I know that there's a campaign to have banks divesting from the gun industry, which I think is awesome. But longer term, that should lead up to something even bigger, to the culture change we want to see, Maybe it's that we want to make guns as taboo as cigarettes, for businesses, ordinary people, and politicians alike. For the mention of guns to provoke that visceral negative reaction. Maybe we're not getting rid of them completely, but we can make it clear that they're not a wise and healthy choice. And this isn't the only long-term culture change goal. It's just an example of one that we might aim for. Next, let's say that guns are as taboo as cigarettes. What do we want instead? So again, not the thing that we don't want people to do or don't want people to think, but what do we want? So when we root the future that we want to see in values or deep narratives, we help make our narratives really sticky and enduring. So at Asian American Futures, we developed a set of aspirational narratives that offer an answer to some of the dominant or harmful narratives like mono-minority. In our case, it's ideas like solidarity, pride, interdependence, belonging, and self-determination. Others that you might add to the fray are thoughts like there's enough for all, we can make it better. Thought leaders like Jeff Yang are really helping us think about what a broader, more pluralist future could look like. And whether we're talking about a narrative, a message for a campaign, or the stories that we want to tell, we need to make sure that we're promoting these values, not contradicting them. We want a future where we're safe and where communities of color are working together to keep it that. But again, what do we want instead of just banks divesting from gun industry? One example is we want them investing in healthy communities. We want something like pre-K instead of AKs. Again, this isn't the only thing we could demand, but it's one thing that describes the future that we want to see, rooted in those values about a safe and healthy future. Next, we need to recognize that not all audiences are equal, right? So our work, we spent a lot of last year doing audience research on Millennial and Gen Z AAPIs and developing these personas or composite characters that reflect a broad spectrum of the attitudes and ideas within the AAPI community, focused on Millennials and Gen Zs. Oftentimes in the API community, we group people by ethnicity, by immigration generation, by the language that they might need when it comes to language access. But not all of these audiences think alike, and demographics, especially for our later generations who have spent most of their lives here in the US, those differences aren't always explained by demographics. So a couple of examples, and you can read more about our personas on our website. But one example, we have our pragmatic strivers. There are people who are motivated by security and autonomy. They believe that individual achievement is the way to get there. So they're always asking, like, what's in it for me? And they might say something like, guns may not be ideal, but they do offer a path to safety in an unpredictable and unsafe world. Contrast that with our inclusive optimist persona, which is probably the majority of people on this call, who are motivated by community and collective success. We believe that we need to stick together to get the life that we want. We ask, instead of what's in it for me, what's in it for us? What's going to contribute to the greater good? And we're talking about how guns cause significant harm and are just too dangerous to be worth it. So these are just two examples of different attitudes and opinions when it comes to gun violence, but you can imagine how narratives targeted at that persona on the top half of the slide need to sound a bit different. They don't need to be rooted in different values, but perhaps all of this language around what's good for the community may conflict a bit with their really individualistic goals. And then lastly, how are we going to reach people? In DC, Rinku talked a little bit about the spectrum between strategic comms and arts and cultural strategy. The bottom line is that we can use an abundance of tactics to reach people. What matters is that you're putting together these 4 questions that I'm bringing up. And I just want to say, for those of us who are creative, we want to remember the power of organizing and those one-to-one relational tactics. And for those who are organizers, we don't want to forget the power of mass media and culture. It's not it's not just a matter of having more movies. It's not just a matter of another TV show. It's about how we're putting all these tactics together to reach the people that we need to reach. So last but not least, this framework for building narrative power asks, what's the future we want to see? What values is that future rooted in? What does our audience actually think about this issue, and how might we reach them? But more importantly, you don't need to have a job called being a narrative strategist to get started. We know that there's so many stories out there. We heard some amazingly powerful stories already just today. I hope that all of you feel empowered to share these stories, to help us think about and help us imagine and help us make real that future that we want to see. So we'd love to hear from you more. I'm including my contact info here if you'd like to chat more. Visit our website. You can learn more about our audience research. And yeah, we hope to hear from you, and good luck, everybody.
Anna, thank you so much. That was so informative, and my synapses are very stimulated. I'm going to take this moment to just ask folks if they have got any questions to put it in the chat, or once again, if you prefer to remain anonymous, you can direct message Liz Lee in the chat. But just to kind of keep us going, let me ask maybe the first question, which is, I'm a very impatient person by nature, and something that I think that perhaps you can agree that Rinku said. I know you didn't attend the DC convening yourself, but something that Rinku said that I think a lot of narrative change people have mentioned is that this can take a long time, right? This can take, in certain cases, generations. But given the flow of information that we are experiencing today, being so quick, right, compared to generations ago when we were trying to, for example, pass gay marriage, or even the women's suffrage movement from, 100 years ago or more. What can we do to sort of accelerate narrative change in ways that maybe we couldn't before? I don't know if you had any sort of big picture thoughts on that.
Yeah. Like I said, I think it's so important to get those stories out there. One of the biggest challenges that I see in API narrative strategy is, we have the frameworks. We can ideate and think about what's the most aligned narrative to put out there. But the reality is that the right has a much more powerful content arm. They're so much more coordinated. We have a lot of catching up to do. And so we need people's stories out there, and creating content is easier than ever, right? I've been experimenting with TikToks for some affirmative action work we've been doing. When things are trending, that's a great platform to help people or that can just pick up and amplify your ideas. I just had a conversation with the Into Action Lab. They've been making GIFs and flooding the Giphy library. Anybody can make GIFs or memes. So I think what's important is, as you're thinking about how you want to share the stories or adding creativity with all the different content platforms out there, is just remember to describe that future that you want to see. It's not just what we want to stop doing. It's not just what we don't want to do, but what do we want to do? How are we going to make things better together?
That's wonderful. Yeah, I was taking some notes as you were speaking. I think those are two immediate things I think that folks can do. And to reiterate what you just said, is start building as much content as possible. You're absolutely right that the other side tends to monopolize. And that's why I think narratives on, for example, the Second Amendment seem to be the dominant narrative about guns in our country, and in many ways is the core of what we're hearing about guns on a daily basis, that right needs to be protected above all else. But yet most folks don't know about the sordid history of why even the Second Amendment is listed as the Second Amendment. Really great. Thank you so much for that. So taking a quick pause, wanted to see if there was any questions in the chat that anybody has. Give it a second here. Okay, so it doesn't look like we've received any questions. We've put your direct email into the chat. Of course, if anybody wants to follow up, feel free to reach out directly. And I wanted to maybe end this program today once again, giving a plug not only for our work at the API Victory Alliance, but mostly to lift up all the great work that the APIs Against Gun Violence Coalition has done over the last year plus, ever since our first convening last year in LA, and then the convening that we had a few weeks ago in DC. We will be doing a third annual convening, so stay tuned to all of you who would like to attend in person. And it's our intention, of course, to keep this conversation alive and more regular. So look out for notices from the Victory Alliance as well as the coalition on future programming efforts. And I think everyone that's signed up today is going to be registered for the AAPI Gun Violence listserv. And you can opt out if you want, but we're going to go ahead and add you to so you all receive those regular notices. And with that, I wanted to thank again our wonderful speakers, Mia and Kalor and Councilman Lowe, as well as Kana Hammond, and look forward to staying in touch and look forward to really being in partnership with you. This is not something that any one organization or one person can do alone. It's going to take our API village to really move the needle forward. And we look forward to being in conversation and partnership with you going forward. With that, thank you again, and wish you all a pleasant week.